Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of Power Core Productions and Podcastings. I'm your host, Jerron Harrington, back to hit you with another video. And today, we are going to be continuing What If Deku Was the Son of Rock Lee, My Hero Academia Fighting Spirit, Part 4. Now, before we get into today's video, I do have one brief announcement that I need to share with you all. Recently, I have been checking the results and the performance of some of my videos on the channel, and after giving it some thought and debate, I have decided to discontinue the series of What If Naruto Was the Avatar and One Piece Rangers of the Sea. Now, I know that for some of you, you guys were really looking forward to those series and you guys really wanted them. Some of you did, but a lot of you didn't. Now again, I do make this content for the fun of it, first and foremost. But above all else, I do want to make content that a lot of you guys are really going to like and get into. So when I see that it takes a long time for a video to hit a certain amount of views and likes, and that the uptick can be really slow, then it really kind of tells me that I need to take things into a different direction. First, when it comes to What If Naruto Was the Avatar, while I did like what I was doing with the story in general, I do feel like there are some areas where I could have improved in. And personally, seeing as how it was doing to begin with, I felt as though in the end, there wasn't really anything more that I could have done that I would have been satisfied with personally. Also, we are currently doing What If Naruto Was Trained by Dr. Strange, and you guys are really into that series a lot more. So I decided to take one Naruto series off so I can focus and put my attention into the other one, since I feel like that's where I'm going to be focusing my attention going forward. Also, when it comes to One Piece Rangers of the Sea, again, this is something that I've been saying with One Piece for a while. One Piece is still an ongoing story, and with what I have for the heroes of the Morphing Grid, when I have the team up come together, that's going to be the end with everything. So my thing is, with One Piece, the story is so far gone in the sense that it's not a series that you can do a whole lot of what ifs with, if only because the series hasn't even had an ending yet. So to try to think of how changing an event or changing powers or things of that nature, how far it could affect the story as a whole, we really don't know. I mean, technically, the One Piece Power Rangers should be more than strong enough to invade and destroy Marijois, but I don't know what the Gorosei can do. I mean, even in the anime and the manga, we haven't seen what the Gorosei can truly do yet. We know that they're probably very powerful, but we don't know how powerful they are, we don't know their abilities, we don't know what they can do. So really, it would just be a lot of headcanon to try to make that story, especially as we go forward with everything that ends up happening and taking place. So it really just didn't feel like it was the best. While I do like the concept and the idea, and if One Piece didn't go on for as long as it did, then I would have had a different feel for it. But honestly, I'm still trying to catch up on One Piece right now myself, and I just feel like it would have been a lot more work than it really would have been worth in the grand scheme of things. So I'm taking that series off as well. Now, maybe I will do something with One Piece in the future, I'm not entirely sure. And as far as What If Naruto Was the Avatar, it can always come back someday. You know, a lot of series on this channel have already been rebooted so far, so that one could possibly go under the same thing. But for now, we're just going to be taking it off and focusing on what we have at the moment. Although I will be having a poll over the weekend for another story that you guys can vote for, and whichever one you guys like, that will be the one that takes that one's place. And if not, I might not replace it at all, and we might just get 2 videos in a week that are part of the same story. I might do 2 High School DxD videos a week, since that series is also pretty popular itself. And if I do so, then next week we could cover all of Season 2, which would definitely be a huge benefit in the grand scheme of things. But we'll just have to wait and see how things play out for now. But anyway, I do hope you understand, and thank you to everyone who supports Power Core Productions and Podcastings. As always, I cannot do it without you. You make the channel grow, you make the core grow. But anyway, without further ado, we're going to get into today's video. So, as always, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Following the USJ attack, many of the students in Class 1A had mixed emotions going back to school. For many of them, they felt as though things had gotten too normal a little too quickly following something like a villain attack. For others, they were excited and revving to go, looking forward to the next challenges that were to come. Mr. Aizawa would quell his students as he announced the upcoming school sports festival, a chance for the students to display their quirks and abilities and present themselves to future agencies as well as heroes who might want to take them on under their tutelage. Many of them were excited for the upcoming event, but there were some concerns. Was it really wise to have a sports festival after an attack of this magnitude? Something that never happened before. However, Mr. Aizawa would assure them that having the sports festival was even more important now more than ever. If they had shown that they were rattled by something like that, then it would only embolden the villains. The purpose of the sports festival this year would serve more than just as a way for them to display their abilities, but it was a way to show their resolve, to show that no matter what the villains did, Hero and Hero Society as a whole would not easily be deterred. There was more to this sports festival than just a competition, and the students would take this to heart. As Izuku was getting ready to go to lunch, along with Ida and with Uraraka, the group discussing how they were going to prepare for this festival themselves, All Might would appear out of nowhere, grabbing young Izuku as he wanted to have a conversation with him, as well as have lunch. The other's understanding would allow Izuku to leave, as he would go with All Might to his office, where the two would enjoy lunch and would catch up on everything that happened. All Might would also tell Izuku about how, thankfully for him and his actions, he were able to reduce any of the loss that might have come from the villain attack. But he also had more questions. Questions about the Nomu, about this Tomura Shigaraki, or whoever he was, and this League of Villains. Izuku would answer All Might's questions as best he could, and then finally All Might would come to the question that he had wanted to ask Izuku for a while, and that was about One for All. Of course, the young boy already knew about what it truly was, so now there was no point in hiding it. It was really just a matter of telling him and asking how he would feel about taking on the power. Izuku was surprised at this opportunity. The idea of gaining the power that All Might had used, to basically become his predecessor. Anyone would want to take that offer if given the chance. But Izuku had already made up his mind on something like this, and although he were grateful to be given such an opportunity, he would decline taking One for All. His reasoning was that his father alone, even while not possessing One for All, proved that he was more than capable of holding his own against All Might. Even though All Might was number one in the world, he believed that his father might have been holding back. Although he didn't say this outright, he just personally believed that the path he wanted to walk down was the one paved by his father, by those who had come before him, the traditions carried on from Konoha itself. Izuku believed that that was the path he would carve to become the greatest hero, and that even if he wouldn't take One for All, he didn't mind helping anyone who did have it. In fact, this actually inspired him to train even harder, because Izuku made a promise that whoever All Might gave One for All to, he was going to surpass even them, and show that his own way, his path to becoming a hero, was the one for him, even if he didn't have a quirk. All Might would be surprised by this maturity from Izuku, but he expected it nonetheless. After all, he knew who the boy's father was, and he could see the influence even in a smile. With that, All Might would thank young Izuku, and he would wish him luck for the sports festival. In the end of the day though, as class when they were preparing to leave, The door would be blocked as there were many students waiting for them. In particular, a student from General Studies, as well as one annoying one from Class 1B. They wanted to check out the infamous Class 1A, the class that had seemingly taken on a team of villains. They wanted to see what made them so special. All the same, it didn't matter to them. In the end of the day, only the best of the best were going to win at the sports festival. And for many, this was their opportunity to step up. You see, in classes, no seat is ever truly safe. Depending on how you perform, you just may or may not lose your spot, and there's always someone waiting to take it. One boy in particular, named Shinzo, made that very clear. Bakugo, however, gave them all death glares, not really caring, telling them that if they got in his way, he would blow them all to hell. Everyone was taken aback by his abrasiveness, but Izuku kind of felt the same. If this was really a fight for your spot, a fight for survival, then there really wasn't any point in holding back. Izuku simply walked away, and everyone else would quickly disperse. As he made his way home, they would have 2 weeks off from school to train and prepare. Izuku, speaking with his father, he would tell him more about what happened at the USJ, about how he had accidentally tapped into the third gate. Lee was surprised. The idea that his son could actually tap into an unknown gate in the midst of battle, that was a development he wasn't expecting. Although, in the heat of combat, you never know what can take place. With the 2 weeks that they had, they figured that they would focus all their attention onto Lee getting Izuku to the point where he could unlock the third gate, the Gate of Life. Thankfully, Izuku had gotten a hold of the first and the second gate, so using them wasn't as difficult. However, the third gate proved to be a little bit tricky, as this was where the power multiplier started to take its toll. Izuku's body hadn't yet fully developed, at least to the point where he could handle that type of power output. Even though he could unlock the third gate, it would only last for small bursts, which was to be expected. He couldn't use it for long stretches of time. And actually that was a good thing, as by the time their training came to an end, Lee would warn Izuku not to use the third gate, not during the sports festival. Izuku was a bit surprised at this. He wondered if his father was sure about him not using it, but Lee would explain his reasoning for doing so. From his time competing in the sports festivals in the past, even though they were a place where you could go all out with your quirk and do your very best in performing and showing off your skills, a power like this could prove to be a bit troublesome. First and foremost, he might go overboard and do some lasting harm to someone, or the damage that could be done to his body might be irreversible. Even though Izuku was proving to be a very good taijutsu fighter, and his skills and his power was increasing by the day, he still had a long ways to go before he could just use his power at free will. Meaning that for the most part, he was taking a gamble every time he tapped into the inner gates. Thankfully, 1 and 2 were safe to use, so long as he did so in a controlled manner. However, the third gate, it seemed to be a bit wild at the moment. Thankfully, he was able to unlock it, but he wouldn't want his son to do anything that could be too much for him. However, Lee would be in the stadium, and the two of them would agree to this. Lee would watch Izuku's fights from the stands, and if Lee felt that Midoriya needed to use the third gate, he would give him permission to do so. However, there was one condition. Izuku had to wear his leg weights at all times. He could not take them off under any circumstances, no exceptions. And if he used the third gate, then he needed to finish the fight with it. If he couldn't win the fight with the third gate, he would most likely have to either forfeit or he would probably lose. And even then, Izuku would have to know that his father would be on standby to pull him out in case anything happened. Izuku agreed to these terms, and his father was proud of his son. However, the night before, as Izuku lay asleep, Lee and Inko would be talking to themselves. They were talking about the future. They were starting to become a bit nervous, more so Inko than Lee. She, even though she knew that her son and that her husband were powerful and could take care of themselves, she was still a concerned mother, and above all else, she worried about what the future lay in store for them. With the rise of these League of Villains, one in particular who might seem to have a connection to a villain from their past, not knowing just when and where this evil would strike, there was no telling of what might happen to their family. They had recently had to have more police surveying their area, never knowing if they could be the targets to a villain attack. Lee would assure his wife that everything was going to be fine, that as long as they stuck together, that they could get through anything, and that Izuku was growing more and more day by day, and that in no time, he would be able to stand and fight on his own, but that even still, he would always have the support of his family to stand behind him. And with that, Inko would feel comforted by Lee, as they would go to get some rest, as they had a lot of cheering to do, as the sports festival was to come the next day. The next day, the students gathered at the arena, as the sports festival was soon to get underway. Everyone was a bit nervous but excited. They had trained and prepared as best as they could, and all they could do now was wait and see what the festival had in store for them. As Izuku was getting on his tracksuit and lacing up his shoes in preparation, he would be approached by Shoto Todoroki. There was an ominous presence as the two stood across from one another. Everyone in the room now seeing for the first time the sons of the number 2 and number 3 heroes respectively, almost as if it were a clashing of the very heroes themselves. Todoroki would spare no expense, telling Izuku that he was fully aware of who he was and who he was the son of. He would then go on to state that this festival, there was a lot riding for him on the line, and that failure was not an option. Almost as if a declaration of war had been declared, Todoroki made it very clear that he intended to win, and even more so, he intended to go through Izuku to do it. Bakugo would be steaming in the corner as he yelled and got in between the two of them, making it very clear that he was not going to be the odd man out in this altercation, and that he too was aiming to be number 1, and he didn't give a damn who their daddies were. He was gonna blow them all out of the water. Izuku stood his ground as well, and he retorted to the both of them that if it was a fight that they wanted, then it was a fight that they were going to get. Now, it seemed as though there was nothing left to do except to wait for the festival to begin. As all the freshman classes were gathered together, they walked out amongst into the field as the stadium roared and cheered, ready for the festivities to begin. Miss Midnight, who would be the conductor for the ceremony, would call for Izuku Midoriya to come to the stage, as he was going to be the one who would give the class speech before they started. Izuku was great at a lot of things. Public speaking, honestly, was not one of them. As he walked out to the crowd, he was extremely nervous. He was excited, but he wasn't sure of what to say. What could he possibly tell them? While standing in front of the microphone, he would take a deep breath, before looking out into the sea of students. He would simply state that he were happy to be here, that he were happy to be competing against everyone here. But make no mistake, he did not take this as a form of weakness. He was born quirkless. That was something he wanted to make very true. But all the same, he was going to prove that even someone who was quirkless could still be a hero. That was the dream, and that was what he was fighting for. And that was a dream that was worth dying for as well. He told everyone to give it their all and to do their very best, to leave everything out there on the field today, and to not hold anything back, because he certainly didn't plan to. The crowd would applaud Izuku for his speech. While some viewed it as a respectful spirit of competition, others viewed it as just a declaration of war. And Izuku knew that he now had a lot more targets on him. The first event would be announced, and this would be an obstacle course race around the stadium, about 4 kilometers in length. President Mike would be doing commentary along with Mr. Aizawa. As the start would be signaled, a large block of ice would form at the entranceway, almost as if it were to block everyone's path as everyone went cramming in through the tunnel. Izuku, however, was able to jump above everyone else, landing upside down on the ceiling. Using his chakra, he stuck to the surface as he ran above everyone else. Making his way to the ice, he slipped out at the last moment before it could be blocked through. Eventually, everyone would break free and the race would be on. Bakugo would be shooting through the air with his explosions, while Todoroki would be skating on a line of ice. Izuku, on the other hand, would be running at top speed, the 3 of them moving far ahead above everyone else, as they came across their first obstacle, a bunch of the zero-pointer robots from the entrance exam. Todoroki would effortlessly use his ice to freeze them in place, causing them to fall over and be even more of an obstacle. Izuku, on the other hand, used his ninja-like abilities to be able to maneuver and move through the giant robots, deciding that the best thing to do was to simply press past them, instead of trying to fight them outright. And Bakugo, he simply aimed for the head and went for large explosions, taking them out in the process. The students all displayed their various abilities, using them to great effect. For some, they used gadgets and different inventions to get across. One girl in particular was doing so, taking very much pride in her work, as she was able to clear many of the obstacles using what she called her precious babies. On the other hand, the top 3 still continued on jockeying for position, moving through across a great cavern that had been dug through in the ground, jumping from large pillars of stone, Izuku hopping through effortlessly, Shoto still continuing his trail of ice, while Bakugo would just fly through with his explosions. They eventually broke from the pack and made their way to the final stretch, a field of landmines. This was where another one of Izuku's ninja-like training abilities would come into hand. He was able to get a sense of where all of the landmines were. It wasn't anything especially akin to Lee. It was just a type of sense that all shinobi had. A way of telling where the danger was, to know where to and where not to jump. Doing so, Izuku would bounce across the ground, jumping where none of the landmines were, effortlessly making his way through, as Bakugo and Shoto would be close behind. The 3-way race turned into a 3-way brawl. Todoroki using his ice, attempting to blast away at both Izuku and Bakugo. However, as a large pillar of ice came falling down towards him, Izuku would open up the first gate. Doing so, he would use a leaf hurricane, kicking the ice back at Todoroki into the air. Todoroki would block it once again with even more ice as it came towards Bakugo. Bakugo firing off a larger explosion, breaking through as ice shards began to fall all upon them. As the three began their race down towards the final stretch, Izuku decided to wait for the right moment to strike, for the right moment to get the jump on the both of them. He purposefully fell back, staying behind as both Todoroki and Bakugo would fight for first and second. He waited for the last moment, for the moment right before they would reach the finish line. As he was preparing to spring forward, he would release and open the second gate, and in one jump, he would propel himself directly past Todoroki and Bakugo, speeding through them like a green blur. He would jump through and take first place, followed by Todoroki taking second, and Bakugo taking third. As before long, everyone else would file in place. Before long, everyone would eventually make their way through, and the first part of the sports festival would come to an end. As everyone gathered together, the next event would be announced. However, first and foremost, for the ones that passed, it would be a total of 42 students, or at least the first 42 that made it across the finish line. They would be the ones that would advance to the second round. The second round being the Cavalry battle. This was basically going to be a team event, where students could make up groups of 2 to 4. Their goal was to protect the respective headband that they would be given from the start, and try to steal them from the other riding teams. They would have a total of 15 minutes, and each student would get a headband with a number count, respective to the place that they had come in. Izuku in particular, since he came in first, would get the highest of all of them, as his headband was worth 10 million points. Not only that Izuku gotten a 10 million point headband, but now he was basically made enemy number 1, and there wasn't anyone that wanted to team up with him. Ochako Uraraka wanted to, and that was nice of her. But as he went to go and recruit Tenya Ida, Tenya would actually decline. Not out of malice or because he didn't like Izuku, they were still good friends, but they were also rivals. He had seen what Izuku was able to do, not just at the USJ, but even up until now. He was a very impressive student and extremely capable, and he was someone that he wanted to test his skills against. Respecting his decision, Tenya would team up with Denki, Momo, and Todoroki, while Izuku's team would be finished out with Tokoyami and Mei Hatsume, who felt that someone like Izuku was someone who would be a great way to show off her inventions to, especially to the higher-ups from other departments who would be watching their performance, deciding that if she were with the winning team, then she'd get noticed for sure. She decided to display her support items and show what they were capable of, and she wanted to see how they could handle with someone who had that type of power. Izuku agreed, and their team would be made. Izuku taking the top as everyone else would carry him, as they began the Cavalry battle. It didn't take long for teams to start attacking Izuku's team out of nowhere, but thankfully, Izuku was more than capable of protecting his own headband. No one was able to get close to him at all. He seemed to have this wicked sixth sense about him, as if he were able to tell where people were going to come before they even showed up. For Izuku, this was just reflexive training, not just with his father, but with his mother as well. He had been trained to always be prepared, to sense where any type of danger or threat could come from. And for Izuku, this had become almost second nature to him. While it wasn't as perfect as his father's was, his father being the type of person who could tell when a bullet was being shot from almost 200 feet and could dodge it with ease. Izuku was more than capable of blocking away at anyone that came close to him. In particular, Bakugo's team and Todoroki's team were already eyeing one another, knowing fully well that they wanted to go after Izuku first, and they had no qualms about doing so. Izuku would see Bakugo coming from the left and Todoroki coming from the right, explosions and ice preparing to meet with Izuku in the middle. Izuku would tell everyone to simply stay in position and to not move at all. As the other teams came close, Izuku would get on his hands before spinning his legs in the air, moving kind of like a helicopter, kicking away at both of his enemies, kicking away at Todoroki and at Bakugo, sending them in different directions as he landed back into the cavalry position. He would tell them where to move and when to strike. He would put everyone in position, and he was able to lead them rather effectively. This sort of leadership skill was something that he had gained from his father, who had gone under many shinobi missions in his lifetime. Being able to organize with a team, to put them together, to put them in the right position. That was another quality that Rock Lee had as a hero. During his younger pro years, he was often known for working together with other heroes, to always come up with a strategy. It wasn't anything too great or refined. He wasn't the ultimate strategist or anything like that, but he knew enough about teamwork. He knew how to use each other's strengths and to cover each other's weaknesses. That was the type of trait that Izuku was displaying, and Lee and Inko, watching from the crowd, were very proud of their son. They were beaming with pride to see how he was conducting and handling himself, to see all of the training that they had done was now paying off for their son, and seeing how he was applying everything that he had learned. He was showing just how special he truly was, and they couldn't be any more proud of their son. As the final minutes came down, Todoroki had kept his eye on Izuku the whole time. Even though his team had more than enough headbands to win, he still wanted to defeat him somehow. He decided to go in for one final strike. They were going to use Tenya Ida's Recipro Burst. They believed that if they could just move fast enough, then they could get to Izuku. Even if he could perceive their movements, it didn't mean anything if he wasn't fast enough to stop them. It's almost as if they've heard that saying before, but oh well. With one burst of the Recipro, Todoroki's team would come flying in as the final moments ticked down. Izuku could see it coming, and he knew that he had to be fast. He didn't think he would need to, but all the same, he would open up to the second gate. He knew that this was definitely going to have some whiplash, but it was what he needed to do. As he opened the second gate, as the team went flying straight towards him, Todoroki would extend out a large mountain of ice in order to block the team at the last moment so that he could reach for the headband. However, the moment he tried to do so, Izuku would use his free hand to catch the ice and to hold it in place. While reversing and spinning around with his left foot, he would kick away at Todoroki's hand, spraining it at the wrist, causing him to wince in pain as the team went crashing. Tenya's Recipro Burst had taken out his legs, and he would need time to cool off. And for Todoroki, he could feel that his hand was definitely hurt. He could probably attempt to use more ice, but that would probably only do more damage if he didn't get it looked at. And there was also his fire, but he had no plans on doing so. And with no choice, they would have to stand down. As the clock would tick down to 0, and the cavalry battle would come to an end. Many in the crowd were watching, thrilled at the display of technique and of power that they were seeing before their eyes. Izuku in particular was getting a lot of attention really fast. He had come in first place in the first 2 of the events, but even more so, it seemed as though people were starting to learn of who he truly was. It didn't take long for word to get around in the arena that he was the son of the legendary taijutsu hero, Hiradora. Lee and Inko looked at each other nervously. It wasn't that they didn't mind people knowing of who he was. After all, he was the son of 2 of the top pro heroes in Japan, in Hiradora and Miss Magnetism. But all the same though, they knew that with a lot of this attention would come a lot of pressure. Pressure that they didn't want for their son right away. All the same, to think that the son of Hiradora would be here, and displaying the abilities that he were able to do, he was definitely getting the attention of many pro heroes. One in particular was watching from the crowd. She had high bunny ears, and she was enjoying a carrot smoothie. She liked what she was seeing from the kid, and she was definitely going to be taking interest in him and what he did next. With the Cavalry battle now over, the top 4 teams with the most points would be moving on to the 3rd and final round, and everyone else would sadly be eliminated. With the final students now selected, they were going to be taking a brief break before the 3rd round would begin, giving everyone a chance to rest and to recover. While everyone was taking the time to enjoy the noon break, Izuku would be wandering about in the stadium. He had stopped to go get some lunch, and he was just looking to make sure that everything was alright. He was going to get some bandage wrap for his arms before the next round, believing that he might need them. As he did so, surprisingly, he would run into none other than Shoto Todoroki. As he met, Todoroki would ask to speak with Izuku in private, and Izuku, feeling as though there was no reason not to, would do so. The 2 boys would meet in a private hall, and Izuku would ask just what it was that he wanted to talk about. First and foremost, Shoto would reveal that the reason why he had declared war on him was because he was the son of Hiradora, and that in doing so, everything that he had been through in his life was actually tied back to that hero, along with All Might for the most part. Todoroki would then explain his history to Izuku, his backstory, telling him of a quirk marriage, about how when 2 people with powerful quirks are arranged to be married together, so that their child could have an enhancement quirk, a melding of the 2, and that he was the product of such a marriage, that his mother and father Endeavor had only been brought together for his creation. He would explain the past trauma and the torment that he had gone through, his mother even growing to despise her own son for looking very similar to his father, and in her own shock and horror, had actually dumped boiling water on him, giving him the scar that he had today. Izuku was devastated to hear such a thing, to think that something like that could have happened to him. But Shoto explained the reason for why he must beat him. Because of his connection to Hiradora. His father had only helped with his training, had only shown interest in him for one reason only: to become the #1 hero. And Todoroki planned to do so. However, he was going to do so his way, in spite of his father. He would become the #1 hero only using his ice, and nothing else. However, Izuku would show disapproval at this. He would tell him that if that was really his only reasoning, then him competing here was nothing more than an insult to everyone else. Everyone else here was giving it their all, trying their best. Everyone wanted to be #1. And for him to simply hold back because of that reason, it was selfish. Shoto was surprised that Izuku would say such a thing, and he merely walked away in frustration. However, Katsuki Bakugo would be hiding away in the corner. He would hear everything from the conversation before leaving himself. With that, Izuku would simply continue about his day, as the noon break would come to an end, and the final event of the sports festival would be revealed. It was going to be a battle tournament. With the battle tournament announced, the bracket would be set up, and everyone would see who they were going to face. For Izuku, his first round opponent was against the boy that he had seen from General Studies, Hitoshi Shinso. As Hitoshi Shinso was getting ready to approach Izuku, from out of nowhere, Mashiro would warn Izuku not to respond to him. In private, he would be told of how he felt as though he had been taken over by a brainwashed kind of quirk, and how it must have happened when he responded to his question. He would warn Izuku not to do so, and that in their fight, he needed to take him out as quickly as possible. As others watched at the board, Ochako would see her first round opponent, and she would see that it was none other than Katsuki Bakugo, which made her a little terrified. All Might would join Lee and Inko in the stands, all three of them sitting together and catching up on old times, before talking about Izuku and how proud they all were of him and how far he had come. He would actually tell them about how he had offered his son the chance to be his successor, and to their surprise, he turned it down. They had always thought that it was a bit funny, seeing as how even though Izuku always looked up to his father, he was definitely an All Might fan. They would note by all of the All Might merch that their son had in his room. But all the same, it didn't shock them that Izuku would turn down such an offer. Even though he admired All Might above all else, there was only one hero who truly meant the most to him in his life, and that was his mother and father, and those were the people who he aspired to be like the most. As Izuku would step forward for his match, everyone would watch on in anticipation, as the first round match would begin between Izuku and Shinso. As Miss Midnight would start, everyone watching on in anticipation, Shinso would attempt to get Izuku to respond to him, first by mocking him, and then by trying to get a retort. However, Izuku had been trained by a shinobi, one who was taught to endure many things. Something like verbal insults, they'd stopped getting to Izuku a long time ago. Izuku merely closed his eyes, and without using any real excessive force, he would appear in front of Shinso before giving him a swift kick and sending him out of the arena. Shinso would be absolutely dumbfounded to think that he could have been defeated that easily. He would start to get angry and curse under his breath. He would ask if Izuku had been told what his quirk could do. He would only remark that it wasn't fair. His quirk was absolutely useless. It was pathetic. How was he ever supposed to win something like this anyway? However, as he continued to complain, Izuku would simply look back to him in anger. He would tell him that he was quirkless, and yet he was still able to win. He had a quirk, and he lost. It didn't matter if you had a quirk or not. There were still other areas that you could improve in. Rather than just relying on your quirk at its base, why not try and do something unique? Izuku would explain that, above all else, he could have trained in martial arts. He could have learned to add more moves to his game. But instead, he did the bare minimum and chose to blame everyone else for his lot. If he continued to do so, he would never be able to rise above. These words actually got to Shinzo a bit, and it made him start to realize that maybe he hadn't been giving it his all. Maybe there was more work that needed to be done. More that he needed to discover about himself. Following their first match, the rest of the first round would continue. The second match was between Shoto Todoroki and Zero. Zero was effortlessly defeated before the match even started, and as such, was frozen out of the competition. The third match was between Dinky Kaminari and Ibara Shizuzaki. While he thought that his electrical quirk would give him the advantage, it proved to be useless against her plant-based quirk, and he was subsequently taken out with ease as well. Some of the matches proved to be a bit more lively than others, such as Tenya Ida versus Mei Hatsume, which the fight turned into being a glorified spectacle to allow Hatsume to show off her various inventions, before she subsequently took herself out of bounds, giving Tenya to win, although he felt like he was used as more of a selling prop than anything else. Before long, the final match of the first round would be Katsuki Bakugo and Ochako Uraraka. Izuku was a bit nervous for Uraraka's safety. After all, this was Bakugo we were talking about here, and Bakugo even warned that if she wanted to, she could drop out now, because he had no intentions on holding back. However, Uraraka knew why she was competing, and she wanted to give it her all. And with no fear or hesitation, she would go all out in her fight against Bakugo, even coming up with a few good strategies, as Izuku could see, but ultimately, it just proved to be not enough. Bakugo's force was really overwhelming, and even though she did end up losing, she had gained much respect by many in the audience. One woman in particular had taken note of her and her abilities, although she would keep quiet for now. Before long, the first round of the tournament would come to an end, and the second round would begin. The first battle in the second round would be Izuku versus Shoto. Everyone in the crowd began to erupt into cheers. This was like seeing Hyodora versus Endeavor, or the second iteration of it. There was no telling what these two children were capable of, or what they were going to do. All Might and Lee looked at each other nervously. They knew fully well what type of a person Endeavor was, at least when it came to his hot-bloodedness, and they knew that this fight could definitely get intense before it was all said and done. As Izuku was trying to strategize what he was going to do as he made his way to the arena floor, he would run into none other than Endeavor himself. The imposing hero stood tall over Izuku. Izuku nervously asked what he wanted, and Endeavor would tell him that he knew he was the son of that green-haired hero, Hyodora, and that even more so, that he had definitely a strong and capable power. He told him to go out there and give his son the fight for his life, to make him go all out and to stop being stubborn and use his power. However, Izuku would only rebuke the hero, telling him that he had no intentions on fulfilling his purposes, that the only thing he planned to do was to help Shoto, but not for him, but for himself. He would become enraged at this, but before he could go any further, he would hear a loud call from the end of the hall. It would be none other than Rock Lee himself. He would tell his son to hurry on to the arena floor, and Izuku would nod doing so, as Lee and Endeavor would stand face to face. Getting in my way as always, Lee. No need to put so much pressure on the kids, after all. You don't know anything. I know enough to know when you might be going too far. If you keep this up, you're only going to alienate your son even further from you. Before Endeavor could respond, Lee would already be gone from the scene. As he said nothing, he would go back out to the stands himself, as the two boys stood in the middle of the arena, preparing to do battle. The match would begin, and Todoroki would create a large wall of ice directly towards Izuku. Izuku would jump into the air to avoid the ice attack, before running down the wall of ice as he went charging straight towards Todoroki. Todoroki would continue to create the pillars of ice around himself as a way of defense. However, it couldn't block for long, as Izuku would use the Leaf Hurricane, channeling chakra into his legs. He would use his kicks to kick away at the large pillars of ice before getting close to Todoroki. The moment he did so, he would hit his body with a combination of strikes and kicks before kicking him towards the outer edge of the arena. However, at the last moment, Todoroki would create a large wall of ice behind him, keeping him from falling out. As he launched himself forward, he would use more of his ice once again as a way to create distance and fight from afar. As the battle continued, as Lee watched on, he got this weird feeling from this fight. It reminded him of the fight that he had had, the one that killed him, the one that led him to this world in the first place. Watching Izuku fight against Todoroki, it was like he was watching himself fight against Gaara. It felt almost too familiar. Lee would continue to punch through at the pillars of ice that were made to slow him down. Todoroki planned to make him use all of his power to exert himself, believing that if he could tire him out, then he could get the win here. However, Izuku proved to be relentless. Over and over again, he kept smashing through. Todoroki started to feel more nervous under the pressure. Izuku was like a relenting force. He just wouldn't stop. As he continued, Izuku would yell at him for holding back, telling him if he kept doing so, he was going to lose this, and that maybe winning wasn't the most important thing to him after all. Izuku continued to punch away, before eventually getting to Todoroki once again, kicking him in the head and knocking him to the ground, before picking him up and slamming him. He didn't even try to throw him out of the arena. He merely grabbed him by the collar and told him that the power belonged to him and him alone. It didn't belong to anyone else. It was up to him to make it his own. He wasn't a slave to his bloodline or to anyone else. He didn't have to be like his father. The only thing he had to do was fight for himself. To fight to be his own hero. To be who he wanted to be. Izuku's words were starting to get to Todoroki. He could feel himself starting to let the tension go. He felt as though maybe now, maybe he could fight for himself. Maybe he could. As the battle continued, Todoroki's fire side would start to spark. His flames would start to power up. And before long, he would allow it to unleash, as a great burst of fire would shoot at Izuku, blasting him back. And now the real fight was about to begin. Endeavor would be overjoyed, thrilled to see that his son was now finally starting to use his fire power, watching the battle continue on. He believed that now he could finally get serious with his son when it came to training. Izuku and Todoroki, their battle would be taken to the next level, as the stadium began to be filled with flame and with ice, boulders and debris starting to break away everywhere. The destructive force these two were putting out, it was more so than what anyone could have expected. As the two prepared for their final clash, Lee could sense that things were about to get intense. He could feel the power coming from Shoto, and he knew fully well that his son he might need that burst. He would yell out to Izuku from the crowd, telling him that he had permission to finish it once and for all. Izuku nodded as he crossed his arms together. Shoto asked what he was preparing to do, and Izuku told him that one way or another, this match was about to reach its end. And Todoroki agreed, as both flames and ice would appear from behind him. He was preparing himself for the final attack, and Izuku was doing the same. As he reached his hands together, clasping them, he prepared to unleash an attack, one that made his father very famous. Izuku would use the hand seal for the outer lion. He had seen his father practice technique many times before. It had gone under many names. It was known as the Daytime Tiger. But for many, the name behind this move was for the greatest taijutsu master in the world. As he prepared, the stadium beginning to erupt, Cementos could sense what was about to come. Midnight also telling that things could get troublesome. Cementos would create 2 large cement walls between the 2 combatants to attempt to stop them from attacking one another. However, Izuku and Shoto would press forward as the 2 would yell their final attack. Hiradora! Flash freeze! And with that, a large collision of energy would converge in the middle of the arena. For Izuku, he opened the 3rd gate before unleashing his own version of the Hiradora, as Todoroki responded with Flash Freeze, the 2 pouring everything they had into the final encounter. There would be a bright light, and everyone would be blinded in that moment, as a loud explosion would ring out through the arena. Waves of heat and ice and powerful surges of energy would flow through, pressing everyone away. They felt as though they were going to be blown from their seats. As the smoke would clear and the dust would finally settle, everyone would look to see where the fighters had gone, who was still standing, who was left. They could see that there were craters outside of the arena, both at opposite walls. In one wall was Izuku, in the other was Todoroki. The 2 had somehow knocked each other out, and neither was getting back up. With that, the match would be declared a double knockout, and both would be eliminated, ending in a draw. While a draw wasn't what people wanted to see, for the most part, this was still one of the most impressive battles that anyone had ever seen in a long time. Everyone was absolutely amazed and stunned at what had happened. They couldn't believe that these 2 students had that type of force, and even more so, they wanted to see more of what they could do in the future. As the crowd would cheer and roar in approval, Lee, along with Inko and All Might, would rush to go and check on Izuku at once, as he was being carted and carried away to the infirmary, along with Todoroki. The 2 boys would eventually awaken, learning of what had happened for the remainder of the tournament, as they had been completely knocked out, and Izuku felt as though his body was absolutely drained. Due to the both of them being eliminated, a few of the matches actually had to be skipped, and instead, it was ultimately decided that the final round would be a 3-way dance, or a 3-way elimination. It was between Tenya Ida, Tokoyami, and Bakugo. The 3 of them put on a good match for sure. Bakugo extra motivated, seeing as how he wasn't going to get to fight either Deku or Shoto, as the 2 of them had gone and gotten themselves eliminated. In the end though, Bakugo was able to pull out the win. First, he took to eliminating Tokoyami. Using his explosions, he was able to quell Dark Shadow, weakening it enough to take it out, before eventually turning his attention towards Ida. Ida tried to use his Recipro Burst to knock him out cold, and while it definitely did ring his bells a little, Bakugo was able to counter. Once Tenya was stationary and unable to move, he hit him with a point-blank explosion to the gut, knocking him out cold and getting the win. While Bakugo had won the sports festival, it still wasn't the way that he had wished he could have done so. All the while, he was still fiercely angry, and he made a promise that when he got a chance, he was going to defeat Deku and Shoto. As the crowd were definitely pleased with this year's sports festival, and many of the pro heroes seeing what the next generation had to offer, they could definitely see new partnerships being formed. And it seemed as though the next generation of heroes had a very bright and promising future. However, as the crowd and the roars of adulation continued on for many, there was a darkness that was lurking about. And for one student in particular, he was going to come face to face with this darkness. For this evil shadow, one that called himself the Hero Killer, had struck very close to home. As far off in another city, the hero known as Ingenium lay in an alleyway, bleeding out profusely. The one known as Stain was now drawing near, and in his mind, the era of false heroes was going to be brought to an end. This concludes What If Deku Was the Son of Rock Lee? My Hero Academia Fighting Spirit, Part 4. As always, if you enjoyed today's video, then please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and hit that bell for post notifications so you can stay up to date on everything that is PowerCore Productions and Podcastings that is to come out now and in the future. Stay tuned for tomorrow's video as we're going to be continuing Darling in the Franxx Lionhearted, Darling in the Franxx x Voltron Legendary Defender, Part 4. But anyway, that's going to do it for the end of today's video. I'm Javon Harrington with PowerCore Productions and Podcastings, signing off, and I'll see you next time.